Hello, and welcome to the Motherhood Village podcast. I am on with a very special guest. I have Major Lynette Falzone of the Fort Lauderdale Police Department. Hello, Lynette. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. So, why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about what you do with the police department, a little bit of your background, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Okay. I've been with Fort Lauderdale Police Department for about 23 years. I'm currently the major in charge of investigations. So that includes our special investigations, which handles drugs and stuff like that. Also, our criminal investigations and our violent crimes unit, which handles obviously deaths and homicides and things like that related to what you want to talk about.
And I know you have two twins, or you have one set of twins, a boy and a girl, correct?
Yes, a boy and a girl.
That's
The
awesome.
He's all boy and she's all girl, and it's just fun to see the personalities in both of them.
I remember I wanted to have twins. Twins runs in my families. I only have the one boy. He's 5, but twins. I heard that even though it seems overwhelming, but it's like at least you have two of them at the same time, and it's not like you have one that's like 6 and is like a newborn. You have two of them growing at the same time. So I would imagine that it's a nice little dynamic to have, especially to have the boy and the girl at the same age.
Yes, my mom calls it she says I always get more than I bargain for. She calls it my BOGO. So,
I love that. I love that. Okay. Let's jump in. So, criminal investigations, drugs, that's a lot. So, the first question I have, and the reason why I wanted to do this conversation, because I am a mom, I am in Coral Springs, and I wanted to kind of also dispel, because I think a lot of times we do hear that things are getting worse or safety. So, I wanted to kind of talk about where we are in that aspect. Are we safe, and things that we should look for as parents, but also on the drug side of things. Fentanyl, opioid drug use, you hear that it looks like candy, so kids have better access to it. Tell me how parents can talk to our kids. I know I came up in the DARE program, right? I think it was drugs and resistance education, if I remember what the acronym for it was for that. What do parents need to know? What is going out there, and because we get inundated with so much information, what do parents need to be aware of?
well, to your point, if you're safe, I think that we are safe in Broward County personally. Um, but there's always things going on, trends,
Yes.
scams, synthetic drugs, you name it. There's always some type of threat to people, and oftentimes people target our children because they don't have the maturity to kind of see the forest through the trees. So, as far as drugs are concerned, one of the most popular drugs right now, obviously, is fentanyl. It's because it's coming through cheap, it's synthetic. In the city of Fort Lauderdale, we see several overdoses a day. Luckily, we have naloxone, which is Narcan, on all the officers. And almost every day, an officer is Narcaning someone back to life and doing CPR. But uh, as far as children are concerned,
Mhm.
people are putting the fentanyl in marijuana. They're mixing with other things. Like you said, they're pressing it into pills, making it look like maybe Adderall or ecstasy or something
Yeah.
else that might be an attractive drug to a college age student or a high schooler. So you really just don't know what you're getting, and uh, it's it can be extremely deadly. We've seen so many people die from it locally, and it's just so prevalent. And there's really no way to prevent. Uh, People aren't cooking it in their kitchen. It's not like the
Yes.
cocaine days or something like that. So
And where are you seeing it, or can we say, like, where is a lot of the drugs coming from? And why do they say, South Florida? For a position like you, if someone, how do you try and stop it? Or is it just one of those battles, like you just have to continue education, informing parents, and I would imagine conversations with my own son as he gets older, because I tell people, I think we come from the experimental age, and I feel like our children are not going to be able to have that experimental age that kind of comes with as you growing up, whether it's with alcohol, whether you might try a little marijuana, whatever that experimental thing is. I feel like our children, that generation, will not have that, because it can be a life or death situation. Because to your point, I mean, I hear the minute you can get fentanyl, like, you can die, you can overdose that quickly, right? You hear a lot of those situations. So I guess it's a two-part question of, you know, where is it coming from, if we know? And number two, how really can we combat this?
So, you know, like I said, there is a synthetic version, which people, prior to it being on Front Street, people were just ordering it through the mail. And, it was coming from another country and things of that nature. So it kind of
Sure.
replaced Flocka in that sense. But as far as what we can do, so a few years ago, I was actually the captain in charge of the drug unit. And that's when people were just dropping off left and right. And I took these letters that these moms were sending to me saying, I lost my child to drugs, do something. And I took the letters to my group of detectives who were all like these real tough SWAT dudes, and they read the letters and they came up with a solution that they wanted to go to every death scene and work it as a drug case because the death part was not workable like for homicide. And they actually did that in so many cases. And in one case, there was a drug trafficker who was targeting a sober home. And so
Mm.
this family had shipped their son down here, who was like 23, to get sober, right? And then you have a drug dealer giving them special deals and stuff to get them back hooked. And the detectives made a great case and they presented it and they actually charged the drug dealer with providing drugs that led to a death. It was the first one in Broward County.
Wow.
So we have a lot of supply and demand in South Florida. We do have a big treatment population here because up north and everything, they take pretty pictures of palm trees and tell you this is where your kid's going to go to recover, and you believe them.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, that's true, right? But then there's a shadier side of that where there's kickbacks and there's all this like financial crimes going on with
Sure.
it. And so, anyways, getting back to, I was the captain of the drug unit, and I said, well, who do we target? Is this homeless people dying? Is this young people, old, white, black? Who is it? And when I studied all the deaths that we had, I realized that it's everyone. It's young, old, rich, poor. It doesn't matter who you are. And so doing an educational campaign, like a targeted educational campaign, wouldn't be practical because you need to do it to every age, to every
Sure.
population.
Yeah.
And so we took that 360 approach. So we did education, we did enforcement stuff, and then we are doing bigger enforcement things as far as things that are being imported and things of
Sure.
that nature. So that's kind of how we approach that problem. And it is supply and demand. So there are other states where different drugs are in supply because that's what's demanded there. And for South Florida, we tend to take the trendy synthetics. A lot of things get their birth here. So
That's crazy. I remember hearing and I didn't realize that that was such a, the word is escaping me, but basically the precedent of saying that you actually targeted the drug dealers for homicide, right? Because in essence, that's what
right.
they did, where that had never happened before. Or at least, like you said, that was the first. So to, didn't even think of two, one on one and equaling two in that aspect of saying that you could do that. I guess in that way, then scaring off someone who would think, okay, well, if I'm going to sell this drug, wait a minute, where before it was just a drug charge, now I can be hit with a homicide, I can be hit with a murder charge. I know I had mentioned that I had seen that there was like Operation Engage by the DEA. What programs maybe that you can specify for any parent listening to this that maybe they can get more information, or maybe if they do have a child that maybe has started some drug use and unfortunately, is addicted, are there programs that you feel comfortable saying that yes, these are programs that actually help people?
Well, there's a lot of things out there. So specifically, like for educational seminars and things of that nature, the Operation Engage, which I believe is through the DEA, and then also United Way has a community response team, which is compiled of just everyone that wants to be a hand on deck to help with this problem. So that meets monthly, and they also put on webinars and seminars. Some of their seminars, they'll teach you how to use naloxone or Narcan in case maybe somebody is living with you that has a substance abuse issue, and you could save their life with that. Um, so there's a lot of different things out there. And to your comments about our curiosity that this generation's not
Yes.
going to have, they're still going to have that. It's just there's more of a threat, right?
Correct. Yes.
Um, Even the drugs that a lot of people got curious with in the 70s and 80s and 90s. If you were to measure the potency of the drugs that were out there then and the potency of the drugs that they're making now, even marijuana, it's the potency now is just light years stronger than what was distributed back then. So while I think this generation will still have their curiosity, I think unfortunately, it's going to result in more
Yeah.
tragedy than it probably ever has.
Yeah, and I think that's the ugly truth behind it, but I think it's so important. I mean, I've talked to parents and they're like, "Oh, I don't want to know, I don't want to hear." And I'm like, I get it, I get it. I was like, but we have to know. We have to know how to have conversations with our kids and being real of saying, your phone or if you're on a device, because that is I guess the next wave, or like you said, that people can actually order drugs. Like that was mind-boggling to me that I remember reading somewhere that they could order it on Snapchat and they think it looks like candy or maybe it is a drug that they could get high, but to your point, it's laced with fentanyl. I'm like, we have to have these conversations with our children. We have to let them know what's out there. Um, how can we, I guess, also stay abreast of information? So I know you mentioned, so let's say if I'm a parent and like, well, for instance, my son is 5, right? But let's say I do want to know more. I don't want to necessarily be inundated with the news where, in that where it's a case here and a high profile case here, but really have the information. I know you said that there's Operation Engage and United Way, but I guess, are there any other things that Broward County does or that Fort Lauderdale police departments or I guess maybe it is just contacting our local police department that we could say, hey, getting more involved and saying, what do I need to know of what's going on in my city? Would that be a way to go about it?
Obviously, everything, as far as the data that's collected is public record, and there's so many grants tied to Narcan, naloxone. So we do keep a lot of data, all the cities do. But what we found is working with other agencies, and we also meet with Fire Rescue monthly.
Mm,
Basically, we try and take more of a global perspective of, going to that meeting and what are you seeing in Hollywood? What are you seeing in Pompano? And kind of putting our heads together because what we're seeing in Fort Lauderdale, if it's not in Hollywood, it's coming there next, right? Or what they're seeing is going to come to us next.
sure.
So kind of just monitoring trends that are hitting locally. And then one of the other things that we do just within our city, not on an educational piece, but our drug unit goes out and they do sample buys. So they'll go out to different areas and just randomly buy whatever they can buy, send it to the lab, and then test it because we're trying to stay ahead of whatever the next synthetic is. The
Sure.
the law was recently changed that the synthetics, so we can keep up with the synthetics, because before the law had to specifically state that drug by its chemical compound for it to be enforceable. So they've done good with some of the laws and things like that. Um, as far as the educational piece, there's different like the United Way. You can subscribe
Sure.
to the community response team and you can watch what's going on there. Um, there's educational things that come out through the school board as well. And I think the biggest thing is if you talk to your kids is telling them not so much for them, but having a recognition. So if they recognize their friends doing something
Mm,
and, you have to make your kids feel psychologically safe to tell you what's going on, right? You have to make them feel psychologically safe to know that they can tell you they need help, that they did something wrong, or that they don't understand something. So if something comes up, you need to make the environment to where they're willing to trust you as a parent and tell you, oh, my friend so and so, I think is doing X, Y, and Z. I got scared. I told him I was, I had to go or whatever, and then educating them on like the dangers, obviously, because it seems like a lot of kids don't understand the finality with death.
yes.
So, and that goes for school violence as well, right? So left and right, these kids are using kill, and to me, that should be a 4-letter word, right?
100%.
Because when we were growing up, you'd never say the word kill. You would maybe threaten to beat up another kid or something like that. But now everything's like 0 to 60 right away. So just educating your kids on what words are kind of off limits
Yeah.
and what kind of actions are off limits. And if they're curious about something, you need to educate yourself on it so that you can educate them on it. And if they want to experiment with something, and you know, you as a parent, you have to make a decision how you're going to allow that to happen or not allow it, and then they're going to sneak it. So, um, you know, I've never tried drugs personally.
Mm,
My father was a police officer, and so I only knew like the dangers of everything. So I never tried any of that stuff.
yeah.
So I don't really have that
Sure.
that kind of internal conflict when my kids become teenagers. I'm not really going to have an internal conflict about it.
Sure.
Um, so and knowing what I know and seeing what I see, and opening my email up with my coffee in the morning and seeing 3 4 people overdosed overnight, luckily they didn't pass, but a lot of people do. And the only reason they didn't pass because the police got there quickly and did CPR and did all these things to get them back. But it's a sad state of affairs. So you got to stay in tune with everything your kids are in tune with.
I agree. And I think you made such a valid point there. I think, we talk about this in some of my support groups, with some of our fears with parenting or mothering. And I think in one hand, I come from the generation like my parents did tell me everything. It wasn't like they didn't really sugarcoat anything. It was like this is either what I've done, this is what has happened. I mean, they grew up in the Bronx, right, in the 70s, 80s. Exactly. And then we moved here when I was like 3 or 4 because my grandmother was not raising children in the Bronx at that time, so we moved to Florida. But anyway, I say all that because I kind of grew with that in my mind. Even though we didn't live in New York, my father and mother raised me to really kind of have that like hard knock school, like this is real, this can happen. And we struggle because I'm like, now I think we're in the generation like, do we tell them too much, do we not tell them too much, how do we make them not have the anxiety, right? Because there is a lot going on in the world, especially when you add the component of a lot of suicide, especially when you add the component of the technology, the social media, the unfortunate mass shootings. So there's a lot that I think even we don't even maybe recognize what our children might have to deal with. So I do struggle with that. Like, how much do we share? I guess that's age appropriate. So that'll lead me to my next question with you because you are raising 8-year-old children. How do you navigate that? Where I know for me, if I am having a moment, I have a business and I get an email and I'm like, oh, and then I have to kind of remove that so I can have a conversation with my son and not be frustrated. Is there a way that you turn it off? How do you then parent when you have a firsthand look at what is going on in your own backyard? How do you compartmentalize all of that?
I guess there's not really a easy way to do that. Um, my kids obviously know what I do for work.
Sure.
Uh, after some high profile incidents, did they understand why I changed before I picked them up at school? No, they didn't understand, but that's what I had to do to feel like I wasn't jeopardizing them.
Sure.
Um, so, as a mom of twins, which is why I have all the bags under my eyes all the time, they they don't always understand why. Well, why isn't mommy coming home? Why is grandma picking us up, or something of that nature? And uh, law enforcement, being a first responder, a nurse, a firefighter, all those things are just their careers that consume you. They completely consume you. Um, it's more of a lifestyle than it is a job.
Sure.
So when you have like a rough day, I'm not going to go home and tell my kids that I saw something heinous at work, but I will go home and go, how much homework do you have? Let's go to the park. And so I do things for them. And also, I live with someone who's very supportive of my career. So if I have a rough day and I come home and I say, I just need to take a walk, I can do that. And I
Yeah.
can tell you from the stuff that you see at work, it's usually not the stuff you see at work, it's the reaction to the stuff you see at work. So, when the FBI agents were murdered in Sunrise, um, being at the hospital and seeing the kids get pulled out of school and then they're brought into a room being told the worst news of their life, that they lost their mother or their father, like just seeing all that, it just makes you appreciate what you have. And you just really have to have a spirit of gratitude for everything you have, because life could be cut so short, and then we see that all the time. So
Yeah. And thank you, thank you, thank you for your service. Thank you for pointing that out, that it's not just law enforcement, it's for all the first responders that have to deal with some, like you said, it's a lifestyle. It's something I couldn't even imagine what that would look like to sacrifice every day, knowing, like you said, that, you have to put your life on the line for someone else. In whatever aspect that looks like, and then still come home and parent, right? I had just the one and he's 5, and I tell people all the time, I think the hardest part of motherhood and fatherhood, I think, or parenting in general, is when we're dealing with our own SHIT, right? Our own stuff,
mhm.
and to the point of trying to say, okay, I try and have honest conversations with my son. I'll even try and say if I had an issue at work and say, yeah, you know what? There was an issue at work and I didn't like something and I had to speak up and I had to say this, and we had a conversation just so he starts understanding conflict resolution and things. But yeah, I think the hardest part is dealing with our own stuff, our own things, our own responsibilities that we have. But to your point, you have a responsibility of much more larger, and then still coming home and having to parent. So, I bow down and I say thank you for your service in that is there anything else as we wind down here? Is there anything else that you'd like to share? Anything that you feel a fellow parent should know about?
I guess one thing that I forgot to mention is when you talk to parents that and you ask them like their kids in their 20s, how did your kid get started on this?
Mm,
Because we make this assumption that it's a curiosity thing and that they went through drug to drug to drug and then here they are having the substance abuse issue. But there was a lot of scenarios when I spoke to people that they said that their kid played sports and got hurt, had a surgery, they were prescribed something. And basically, when you take something out in layman terms, and I'm not a neurologist, so, I'm just a police officer, but uh, in layman terms, if you take something that you don't need, then you're creating new pathways to receptors that aren't there, which then they start highlighting, that they need something, which, becomes addiction, obviously. So uh, they started out maybe by getting some type of opioid that was prescribed for surgery. And then maybe they broke up with their girlfriend and they're like, I don't know how I'm going to sleep. I'm crying my eyes out. I always slept good with that Oxy or Roxy or
yeah.
whatever they have. And they take that and now they create these neural pathways and then eventually you can't get prescription drugs because now that's obviously very monitored and regulated, uh, and just the things that you think are helpful like Xanax and anti-anxiety drugs, they're heavily addictive. So they're the thing that if you have to um, get something like that prescribed to your child, you need to monitor when they need it and how they're using it.
Mhm.
And uh, same with like Adderall, very addictive. So everything that has a very good medicinal purpose is only there to be a medicine when you need it, and not as a crutch when you are stressed out or you're suffering anxiety. So looking into like alternative things, if you're aware of yourself and you say, oh well, your kid has a lot of anxiety or they're depressed, figuring out activities and things like that that will pull them out of that, like um, mindfulness and breathing,
Sure.
yoga. Maybe it's boxing, maybe it's jujitsu, but finding something that they could pour that nervous energy into and get it out of their brains and out of their bodies. And because you can get addicted very easily to almost anything, obviously. So.
Oh my God, thank you for that. And that's such a valid point because I think, yeah, a lot of times we think maybe it's just for the expert that they're, which I'm sure there's instances of that, obviously, where it's experimenting, but also from a lot of cases of people I've heard. I do have recovering drug addicts in my family, which is, I think we could go down a whole nother pathway, right? When you have it already in your system, when they say that it's genetics, uh, and it's something to be mindful of. But to your point, even so, if you are aware of that and you do have it in your family, and that if something happens, that we are monitoring, I love that, what we are giving our children and maybe finding other ways to kind of get through it as opposed to just relying on the drugs, and then they use it as a crutch. And then, of course, unfortunately, it falls down that rabbit hole. Um,
And if you find a pill or something like that, like maybe in your kid's bag, you can call poison control. Just Google poison control and you read them the numbers that are on that pill, and
oh,
they'll tell
wow.
you if it's legitimate or they'll tell you, what legitimately that code goes to. And it might just be an aspirin or an Advil or something like that. And that's great. But, just for your peace of mind that you find a pill, now you know if it's, a Xanax or an Oxycontin or whatever the case may be. So you do have options of doing your own recon without, you don't have, it's not a big deal. You don't have to call the police. You find a pill in your kid's backpack. You can kind of do your own little investigation. So you don't have to live in the unknown, I guess.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Thank you for that. If there's, is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything else that you can think of? If not, then yeah, go ahead.
No, not really. I mean, I'm very passionate about this, dealing with parents and seeing their loss, and I hope I never have to feel what their loss is. But dealing with that, I do have a passion for this. So, we could talk about this all day, or different threats to our kids, because obviously I'm seeing it all the time. So I'm hyper aware and trying to figure out, is 6 too early to tell them? Is 7 too early to tell them? Now they're 8. Now just incrementally exposing them to facts,
Right.
so that to dispute whatever they're hearing at school. But I appreciate you asking the questions that you asked and highlighting this topic, because obviously this is something a lot of parents worry about and deal with.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, 100%. That's the key, right? It's how, especially when as much as we can try and be as open as we are here, or maybe not expose them to stuff, but then they go to school, right? And then it's exposed, and I guess that's when you have to make the decision. How much do I say? I remember being scared about having sex, to be transparent, because I knew someone who died of AIDS, and that was the big thing back in, what was
That's
that,
a
like
big thing.
94 back then. And forever I was afraid of having sex up, and I was like, no. Or it wasn't even pregnancy, it was knowing that you can die from that. And I was maybe 11 years old, which going back maybe was young, but I mean, you get exposed, you hear things, and you just have to, you just have to work with it, I guess, as a parent, right? We just have to try and do the best that we can. So thank you so much, Lynette. I'm sure we will be in touch again. And if there's any topics that you feel that you'd love to come back and share, this is what this podcast is for. It's for education, it's for community, it's for connection. So I appreciate you. Thank you for your service, and continued blessings to you for love and light and all that you do. Thank you.